What have I become? My sweetest friend, everyone I know goes away in the end, and you can have it all. My empire of dirt, I will let you down. I will make you hurt. These words are from Johnny Cash in the well-known song Hurt. It's a very sad, somber, and sobering song where Johnny Cash claims to realize that no one is forever. Nothing is forever. Not even this pedestal that society can build up of us. People had built a pedestal up of him, realizing that he's going to let people down. That version of himself is not forever. Nothing is going to stand. And then we get quite claim from someone who has such an illustrious music career. He's saying, you can have it all. You can have this empire. And he doesn't even call it anything good. He calls it an empire of dirt. Hi, I'm Joe from Valleytown Church. And when I was 19, many of my friends will remember a transformation that I had where I met an eternal God. I met Jesus Christ, and I basically said you can have this empire of dirt, and was forever changed for that. I told this world they can have it. They can have what I've worked for, and I clung to Jesus in that moment. And today we're going to be reading about an empire of sand, not dirt, where we see three powerful examples of people clinging to an eternal God and not this temporal world. Our story picks up in our series that we've been going through. Brian's been preaching through the Hall of Faith chapter, as it's called, Hebrews 11, and today we're starting the story of Moses. I'm going to read to you the verses in Hebrews, where writers are looking back after the fact on this character in the Bible. And then we're going to go back and look at the historical account and the details and try to get some context for these three claims. So we're reading in Hebrews 11, 23 to 25. Hebrews 11, 23 to 25. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Okay, those three verses I'm going to unpack for you today. Not fully. I'm going to be saving a few things for Brian to touch on next week. But I am going to be focused more on the beginnings, the story of Moses and his parents at first. So we're going to look at where the story picks up. We're going to go back to the Old Testament, thousands of years before those three verses I just read to you were written. Accounting this time in history of the Hebrew people, who would be known as the Israelites, who were God's chosen people at the time, who were being built up, and basically, starting with Abraham, these people were basically promised that, yes, though you are one family, I'm going to make you as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So that the fact that they're going to be numerous, even though they started with one family, and the blessing in the end, which we know culminated in the birth of Jesus Christ. So anyway, Exodus chapter 1, I'm going to be first reading verses 8 to 22. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them, to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. And the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad, and the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Verse 15, Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, When you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it's a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, Why have you done this, and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because of the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Okay, that is the passage for the context of one of the verses in Hebrews. Of these Hebrew people, remember, God had said to Abraham, I'm going to make you numerous. You'll be fruitful and multiply, as many as the sand on the seashore. Clearly, God was carrying out his blessing, but Pharaoh actively opposed God's plans. Notice the language to describe the treatment of these Hebrew people, Israel, whom God chose to be his own people. I think that's significant. They were subjected to, and I'm going to read some quotes from that passage, they were subjected to affliction, heavy burdens, oppression, ruthlessly forced to work as slaves in bitter and hard service. And as we know, this treatment went on for 400 years. These Hebrew people were in slavery. And that was predicted, in fact, by God years earlier. Imagine, I want you to put yourself in their shoes. You are God's chosen people. Yet you, your parents, and your great-grandparents, and so on, are seeing no earthly benefits from this relationship. Your only comfort is knowing that you are in the family of God and that one day it's going to end. Would you be able to still trust this God that allowed you to suffer this much? Right in the middle of the story, we have some heroes, some superheroes show up in the faith. I'm not really sure why they aren't part of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, and Moses' parents are mentioned, but they're in my Hall of Faith for sure. They made it in my book. And that would be the Hebrew midwives. Pharaoh commands these women to kill the firstborn sons of their own people as soon as they're born. As if life hasn't been brutal enough, they are given this horrendous task from Pharaoh to do the opposite of their job description. So rather than being part of the miracle of birth, they are called to take away that miracle of birth in a really brutal way. I think for me personally, I can see that it would be easy to want to defy Pharaoh in this. I mean, what else can he take away from them other than their lives? So I'm not surprised that these women would not carry out this order against their own people. But what I'm interested in is what their motives were for disobeying Pharaoh. The account mentions twice that it's their fear of God that outweighs their fear of Pharaoh. It is their regard for God that causes them to act. This tells me that they have faith that God exists. They, who will have lived a lifetime of harsh living, have not had their faith eclipsed, their faith in God. Since God originally promised this people that they'd be numbered as many as the sand on the seashore, I wonder, possibly, since they would be part of that process, the birthing process, they had seen these Hebrew women give birth at a remarkable rate, and that grew their faith in God, and that's how they were able to hold on. It's possible. I could see that happening, certainly. However, on the contrary, this is an interesting point I want you to consider. Even though God was keeping his end of the bargain and growing this people, the midwives were not part of this. They didn't receive the benefits to this promise. And the evidence I want to share is in verse 21, what they got out of the deal when they defied Pharaoh's order. It says, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. And so you got to see from the perspective of these midwives, even, so they're people of God, they're in slavery, that's all they've known, brutal slavery, and it seems like everyone else is reaping at least the benefit of having a lot of kids, and they remain barren. At least that's what I'm seeing, because before that they didn't have kids. So it's like they had at this point received no benefits from a relationship with God, aside from God himself. I can't point to anything that they had that would allow them to keep going in their faith. And I find that remarkable. I mean, they didn't know the end of the story. They didn't know that they would be rewarded with having children of their own. It was simply because God is God, I am going to do the right thing. I am going to oppose, no matter if it means my execution from Pharaoh, I am going to do the right thing. Because I fear more this God who has the power over my eternity than Pharaoh who has the power over my body. And we see these women act in faith, and they're rewarded by God for their brazen trickery of Pharaoh. So that's our first example of faith in spite of getting nothing, not even an empire of dirt or sand in this case. So the story goes on in verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So Pharaoh, seeing that his plan was not working, decided to take matters into the hands of his people, the Egyptians, and he commanded his soldiers to carry out the dirty work here. I want you to see the absence of hope here, the absence of Pharaoh being bested, the fact that God is not stopping Pharaoh from carrying out this brutal order. It's a terrible time, a time of sadness, hopelessness. I got to imagine even these midwives who had new families, I imagine they were victims of this slaughter as well, their firstborn sons. It is a dark time in their history. But I also want you to notice that it's at this moment that God chooses to raise up a leader who would deliver them from the slavery. He chose the least likely candidate at their darkest moment, one of these baby boys, sentenced to death moments after being born. We pick up the story in verse 1 of chapter 2 of Exodus. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. So this is the story that made the Hall of Faith, believe it or not. In Hebrews 11 that I read, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months. This is 11 verse 23 in Hebrews. He was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful and when they were not afraid of the king's edict. So I really appreciated the faith in God mentioned, the fear of God mentioned, the midwives as their motivation. So I was really confused when I read in this chapter in Hebrews that it was the parents noticed Moses' beauty, and that's why they decided they weren't going to have him cast into the Nile. I thought it was a mistranslation. I thought, okay, maybe they just kind of missed the mark. It was just like something different. But I looked up the original language. It seems to hold up. It seems that he was a handsome kid. Arguably, maybe he came out with a mullet, and they saw the mullet, and they said, "This is the kid. This is going to be the one." But if you look at other parts of the Bible, specifically in Acts chapter 7 and in Stephen's speech, he mentions that Moses was beautiful in the eyes of God. And so thankfully that brings God into it. And I think bringing God into the picture and the fact that it was credited to them as faith, which is in the unseen, I believe Moses' parents were, again, demonstrating a similar faith as the Hebrew midwives. I think they were demonstrating their faith in God's power over Pharaoh's. So at that point, when they chose to hide Moses, they already had Miriam, Moses' older sister, and so they had a lot to lose at this desperate attempt to save their baby. His parents risked their lives of their whole family to hide him for 3 months. Now, my wife and I are pretty soon having a baby boy March 1st, so woo, we're so excited. And I've been reading up a whole bunch of stuff on babies and pretty much all the struggles that happen when you have your first child. Basically, take everything you know and throw it out the window anyway. But I hear some tales of babies having siren-like crying. And, arguably by design, their cries are supposed to make you, it's supposed to be grating, and it's supposed to make you, like the parent, act and want to stop the crying and take care of the baby. And, it's like, okay. And, whatever. I'm learning there are like 10 things to do, a list of 10 things to try when your baby's crying. And, whether it's food, discomfort, they poop themselves, possibly they're just bored. There's a whole list of things to try. And then you try all that list of 10 things and they say, well, sometimes that doesn't even work. They're just going to cry. Okay, so apparently that is the truth of babies. I will find that out due May 1st, God willing. I'll find that out and find out just how much of a joy that is to try to keep the baby quiet when you're trying to get some sleep. So Moses' parents are trying to hide the birth of their baby, and they do that successfully for 3 months. That says it's possible, right? That gives me hope. You can keep the baby quiet for 3 months. That's going to be my goal. In any case, this just further demonstrates their faith and the immense challenge that they took on to try to keep this baby secret. It's quite the feat. I don't know how they did it. With the help of the Lord, I guess. So they joined the ranks of the midwives in demonstrating their faith. I'm going to keep reading in the story. It picks up in verse 3 of Exodus chapter 2. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister, Moses' sister, stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. Oh, hey, okay, so the baby can cry. There it is. So I don't know how they kept the baby quiet, because the baby can cry, and babies do cry. Fun. All right. No, I'm really looking forward to this journey. I really am. But anyway, she took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So Moses' sister, the girl in this situation, the girl went and called the child's mother. So good strategy from Moses' sister. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." Interesting. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." All right. There we have the story. There's more to unpack, but I want to just focus on this part of the story. So we had read previously, in weeks prior, Brian had covered the story of Joseph, where his brothers betrayed him, overpowered him, and sold him into a life of slavery. After years of suffering the consequences of this evil action, Joseph miraculously, through a lot of different events, finds himself second in command of all of Egypt and becomes a deliverer for not only Egypt, but for his own people during a terrible famine. He concludes that what his brothers meant for evil, God meant for good in his life. God does not cause evil to happen, nor would he ever set in motion any evil plans or even ideas. But he knows the end from the beginning, and he knows how to work all things for the good of those who love him, and even how to turn evil into good. Pharaoh's evil plan of population control through ruthless slaughter of newborn boys was not enough to overcome God's plans for his people, and God would eventually use this evil action to raise somebody up who would deliver his people out of slavery, the Hebrew people out of slavery. In fact, little did Pharaoh know that his plan would actually bring a Hebrew baby into his great palaces, into all the wisdom and learning Egypt had to offer, into all the fruits of his land, learning and sharing in the knowledge of the Egyptian gods for a time, share his power and influence, and even become a part of his family and join him at the dinner table. Quite a turn of events for him. You can see God using this evil thing that Pharaoh did to bring about ultimately good, because Moses was the one who delivered, through God's power and miracles, who was part of the delivering the Hebrew people, the Israelites, out of this slavery. It's quite a turn of events, and there's a lot to say about that, but we don't have time to focus on that one today. The next two verses in Hebrews 11:24 say this: "By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, this Moses, refused to be called son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin." Hebrews 11:25 continues, "He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward." At age 40, that's how old he was, Moses realized the truth. Those people enslaved, the ones that Pharaoh treated like mere machines on an assembly line to be controlled and disposed of, the ones whom who Moses looked down on his whole life, despising their God and benefiting from their suffering, Moses realizes he's actually one of them. Looking down from his palace, he saw the life that he could have lived and how far it was from his current position. Surely the lives he saw beneath him, surely this wasn't true living. He sees people whose God seems silent. 400 years of slavery. That's multiple generations. His God seems silent while the firstborn boys of his people are slaughtered, and everyone is trapped from sunrise to sunset to serve brutal taskmasters in the hot Egyptian sun and reap no pleasure for themselves. Now I think I can see one possible response for Moses if you were actually a good guy. You might have compassion to think, okay, I came from that. I mean, you might just say, yeah, that's not really who I am. I got raised with these Egyptians. That's who I am. These people aren't my people. But kind of a compassionate strategy would be to say, well, I'll still enjoy the riches of this life, and I will work on the side to maybe through politics make it a little easier for these people, since they are in fact my people. But there's God, and there's faith. I'll read those verses again. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. First, God. First, faith. Even though well versed in the teachings of Egypt about the Egyptian gods, and are most likely well practiced in pleasing those gods, Moses realized the truth. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, Yahweh, this God moved on his heart in a way that no other statue or depiction of the Egyptian gods had ever done. And when you meet this real God, when he draws you to himself, you realize you have found the way, the truth, and the life. At age 40, Moses realized nothing that Pharaoh could ever give to him could ever match becoming a child of God. He didn't accept God for the Bentley or the Rolls Royce or the Porsche 911 that would come with it. In fact, how much further could you fall, going from a ruler of rulers to the oppressed slave? Moses understood correctly that to reject God, Christ, eventually had far more consequences than the hand of Pharaoh could ever inflict. He realized, as it says in Matthew 10:28, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both the soul and the body in hell. Moses turned to Pharaoh and said, you can have it all. You can have my empire of sand. For that's all it was. And he walked away. The midwives defied this world. Moses' parents stood in defiance to this world. And Moses defied the world. All did so demonstrating their faith in God, rejecting the strongest force of humanity at the time. And Jesus, I'm reminded of him and his story. Jesus had a similar story to Moses in many ways, but far superior with unmatched benefits for us. Leaving the comforts of heaven, born in humility to Mary and Joseph, during a time where a king put out an edict to have all the firstborn sons killed, accepting the weakness of humanity, yet still God. Eventually, in a time before his ministry, offered all this world, tempted by the devil in the desert, yet he forsook this offer to this world, and instead, to fulfill his ministry in defiance to the shame of the cross, taking the full penalty for our sins to be our deliverer. Will you realize today that there is one God? There's one God and deliverer, Jesus Christ, who has the power to bring you into the family of God, which is a treasure to be enjoyed for all eternity. Will you walk away from the empire of dirt? It comes through faith in Jesus Christ, accepting that free gift of salvation. It doesn't come through works, but through faith in what he's accomplished on the cross. And for the Christian, is God your true treasure? Will you find contentment in him and act in faith even in the midst of any suffering you may be enduring in this life, even if nothing seems to go your way? This past week, I read an account of a Chibok girl, a woman now who was set free in 2017 from her captors of Boko Haram. She told a story of defiance and faith that's truly an example for us. She said that while being held hostage, never knowing that if she would live another day and experiencing beatings for defying her captors, brutal beatings, she and her fellow captors began singing praises to God. They were Christians. They were singing praises to God. She said that their hymns to God started out quiet, but then they grew bolder and louder as time went on. Their eyes were set on God, and they not only held on to their faith during this terrible time, but they defied the consequences of this world. Christians, those who believe in God, we're all going to experience the ebbs and flows of life. We may experience times of much, but we will experience times of little. Is God a treasure to you today? Does God look like a treasure and the world look like dirt that can flow through your fingers in comparison? All the treasures of the world I'm talking about. Because we know that God loves the world. God loves every person in this world. So people aren't dirt. But our achievements, our strivings to build our own kingdoms, that's going to pass away. That's going to pass away. So I encourage you today to have a faith like we've seen that is in spite of something. So that's pretty much my definition of faith. Faith is in spite of obstacles. So even if it's just believing in an unseen God, you are believing in spite of something. And so I encourage you with that today. Have a faith that is not in the God of the Bentley and the Rolls Royce, and get the God who is your God because of all the things he does for you in this life. Okay? We serve a God who does give good gifts, and I hope that Brian, or maybe I'll get an opportunity to share it at a later time, the riches that we get to enjoy in this life. I'm not talking about monetary riches, but the riches and the gifts that God bestows on us and the incredible joys that he brings in this life. Okay? There are treasures that he has for us. He's a good Father for us. It is an amazing journey. But there are countless stories, and we live in a broken world, and bad stuff happens. So I hope that you see these three examples where arguably nothing was going right, but God was still in control. And these people were able to hold on to their faith and actually act in faith in spite of a lot of different things that were huge challenges that I hope none of us here have to ever face. So if they can do it with their challenges, We can do it when we, with our challenges like stubbing our toes or stuff like that. Our challenges seem to pale in comparison to theirs, but everybody's challenges, when you think about it, we all have something that we could say, I believe in God in spite of X, Y, and Z. We all have our list, things that are causing us to want to doubt, to want to give up and just say, yeah, I'm done. But we know, where else would we turn? Which other God would we turn to? There's only one God. That's Jesus Christ. Okay, so if you're a seeker, if you're wondering, can I put my faith in Jesus? Can I walk away from this world? You have some example. You have a prime example of Moses accepting that, and I guarantee you Moses does not regret it. And you have Joe Carter here who did that. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect, and I do have things I still hold on to, like I haven't given everything up. Obviously, I have treasures hidden under my pillow that I find, and I'm like, why am I still holding on to that? As far as this world goes. But that's where grace comes in, and we serve a gracious and loving God who puts new desires in our hearts when we choose to follow him, and we are given new life and a new journey, and we're given help along the way. We're not on our own. So neither were any of these characters, any of these people that I read about. They were not on their own. They were not operating in their own strength. Yes, it was faith, but God is the one who gives us the power to believe and the power to act. All right, everybody, have an awesome week. Looking forward to part 2 and 3. There is, for the story of Moses, it's a gold mine. So I hope Brian enjoys teaching on this in the coming weeks. I know he will. I know he's going to do a great job with it. And I look forward to talking with you guys. Our church group, we like to Zoom after each sermon. So if you want to talk about any of this, if you want to make that decision, reach out. All right. Awesome. All right. Have a good week. See ya.